Hey guys, what's up? Hope you're all doing well out there. Got a little something pretty special I think today. Because a lot of the time we do these videos where we showcase cut content in various video games, but we can't often say why it was cut. But today we're going to be talking to a developer that worked on the Getaway. He was a vehicle designer and his name is Mike Rouse, and you can see his name in the credits of the game. He's still a developer, but he also runs his own YouTube channel on the side now, and you can watch his videos at Retro Gamer Boy, and I highly recommend that you check out his channel. So in this video we're going to be talking to Mike all about the cars that were cut from the original Getaway game, and we're going to get Mike's thoughts on why these vehicles were cut. Before we get into the video, I want to also give a big thanks to RacingFreak once again. He's done so much detective work on the Getaway to actually bring these cars to light. And for the first time, we can actually see these vehicles driving around on the Getaway. So we're not just reliant on old kind of press photos and screenshots, we can actually see these cars as they would have looked in the game. So, over to Mike.
Hi, my name's Mike, aka Retro Gamer Boy on YouTube, and I'm a AAA games developer and have been in the games industry for about 20 years. I've worked for games like Sony PlayStation, Microsoft Xbox and Ubisoft. I was fortunate to work on games like For Honor. I also created the PlayStation trophy system, and I was the car artist for the Getaway and the Getaway Black Monday. Being the vehicle artist on the Getaway was a super awesome job, but it could be massively frustrating sometimes, as there were a large number of vehicles that we would fully model and get into game that were eventually cut. I'm going to be taking you through the vehicles that we cut and why we cut them. The Aston Martin V8 Vantage was one of the first vehicles that was modelled for the Getaway. It was also one of the first vehicles to be cut from the Getaway, as we didn't get licensing. And it was a real pity because this was an awesome vehicle for the game. The Audi TT was actually a replacement for the Porsche. Now, we had the Porsche up and running at its highest lot, racing around the world of the Getaway, but we didn't get the license for it. So we went for the Audi TT. Now, the Audi TT actually made it to the front cover of Edge, and interestingly enough, we created this amazing piece of artwork to go on the front cover of Edge, and then Edge did this silver effect over the car, I guess to make it look metallic, which just made it look awful. Anyway, we didn't end up getting the license for the Audi either, and so that's when we went for the TVR.
Okay, well, I just wanted to chip in with a couple of my own thoughts about the Audi TT and the Porsche 911. Firstly, I'm not actually sure if there are any screenshots out there of the Porsche. Maybe it was just early on in development and it was never shown to the public or to the press, but I couldn't seem to find any. The only thing that I could find, and it's quite amusing actually, is some screenshots of the Audi TT that have been doctored to make it look like a Porsche. I don't know whether this was done in-house at Team Soho or by some kind of rogue journalist, but for whatever reason, they exist. Also, Mike mentions a certain Edge magazine cover where they'd kind of, again, doctored an image of the Audi TT to make it look terrible, in Mike's opinion. Sadly, I couldn't really find this either, but I did find one of what I think is the Brabus S-Class, and it's got that kind of similar silver metallic look to it, which, yeah, doesn't really make it look very realistic at all.
The Bentley is the first of 4 cars that we tried to license to be Charlie's main vehicle. We ended up with a Rover 75, but the Bentley was the first car that we actually modelled for the game. Again, licensing prevented us from getting this car.
Yeah, the Bentley is another interesting one. It actually did make it into the final game as Charlie's car, but it was only ever used in cutscenes. There were some other colours of the car found by RacingFreak, so maybe these would have appeared in traffic, who knows. Also, RacingFreak put a lot of work into actually making the car playable on the Getaway. So, thanks to him, you can not only see it driving around on the streets of London, but you can actually drive it yourselves too.
The Rolls Royce was the second car that we had. Now, we modelled this up very early on, and so actually the quality of the model wasn't as good as our final cars that were put into the game, but it was a car that was taken to a near final model, but again cut because of licensing. We lost BMW, and this was a real kick in the teeth for me. These were all my cars. The BMW 5 Series was actually the first car that I modelled for the Getaway, and it was the first vehicle that I had modelled in my gaming career. The BMW 3 Series was also cut when BMW went, and there is a car and file name in there called BMW 3 Series Dodgy, I think, or M3 Dodgy, and this was a texture version of the car where I'd kind of just muddied things up and made it look a little bit more wrecked. Chrysler Voyager is just another example of a license that we lost. It was no big deal for us. It was going to be one of the police vans, but we weren't too worried about losing that vehicle as we found another to replace it. The Daihatsu Sirion. Now this car really hurts. Now we have the Daihatsu Sirion in the game, and it's actually a replacement for another car that we lost, which is the Mini. Now the Mini really hurt us because the Mini was an iconic car that you would see around London. But with the loss of the BMW license, we lost Mini as well.
The Mini is sadly another one of those cars that we just don't have any screenshots for, at least on the PlayStation 2 version of the Getaway. Like the Rolls Royce, there are actually some original screenshots of the Mini for the PlayStation prototype, which never got released. So, like the Rolls Royce again, it looks as though the developers wanted to port over these original cars to the PlayStation 2 version, but sadly licensing got in the way.
Now there is a Daihatsu Sirion test car. Now I built the Daihatsu Sirion, and my test car, the test version of this, is where I would try out new texture techniques, new poly optimization techniques, and the reason why it has test underneath it is so that I made sure it didn't make it into the final car list that went out with the game. But I tried things like new window breakable textures on there, new car damage textures on there, and I actually did some R&D that would make it into the Getaway Black Monday. And that is, I created an alpha and dent channel on the side panels. And this alpha layer on the side panels would actually ramp up in intensity, so become more opaque than transparent, showing that you were doing more and more damage to your vehicle. But unfortunately this R&D tech didn't make it in time for the Getaway, so it went into Black Monday. Ford, one of the biggest losses, and it came quite late on for us. I think just before beta, we lost a huge roster of vehicles when we didn't manage to sign the licensing for these cars. And to be clear, a lot of the car licensing that was going on, manufacturers weren't that worried about their cars being in games. They actually saw games as not a real serious medium for licensing. They were all about films and print media. But the big thing that put licensors off of what we were doing was the fact that we could smash up their cars and people could be killed, and you could kill people with their cars. For some licensors, we managed to kind of skirt around the edge of this and get away with it. Others were a little bit more savvy, and Ford were one of these. Now we do have the Ford Transit van in the game, although we modded it heavily so that it wasn't a Ford Transit van. But any of the service vans, the white vans that you see driving around, were based on the Ford Transit. There is a beta version and an old version in there, and again, I think the old version is the original model, and I think the beta model was the final model that ultimately made it into the game, I think. Police Transit van, again, it's pretty much, I think, the final van that went into the game. It was just our test model to see if we could actually pull off a police version of the Transit. Capri and Cortina, two of our favorites in the car department. There were two of us in the car department. We really enjoyed these vehicles. We'd messed around with the physics in the game, and we'd given them some loose suspension, so when you went around corners it felt kind of really nice, like you could skid around these corners. Really fun cars to drive with, but again, we lost those with the loss of Ford. The XRI and the Fiesta. Now I think the Fiesta police car made it into the game, but it's like 15 years ago since I last played the Getaway, so I can't remember. I'm pretty sure I got it in there, but made enough changes to it so that it wasn't a Fiesta, maybe? I don't know, I'm gonna have to go back and play the game.
Ah yes, the Ford Fiesta police car. So close to making it into the final game, but sadly was cut, contrary to Mike's memory. The Fiesta police car did actually appear on the PAL demo of the game, so it was kind of released to the public, but just not on the full game. So, because it was featured on the demo, it must have been cut really late into development, so yeah, a shame it didn't make the cut. In the final game, the Ford Fiesta police car was actually replaced by the Peugeot 306.
And the Granada, and it was a pity to lose the Granada because it was a good car for just making up the traffic. The Volkswagen Golf was a really difficult car to lose, but I managed to salvage some of it by making the bad boy version of it. Again, I kind of tweaked the model a bit so it wasn't too Golf-like, and then did some really cool things with it. I think I took the lights or the indicators and I made purple versions of them and stuck them underneath the car. I just stretched out the UVs underneath the car, so you've got this kind of UV light effect underneath the car, and also gave the car a couple of extra verts. So I went actually over the 2000 vert count that we had for each high LOD car, and I put maybe an extra 50 in, just so I could get the body work at the bottom in there.
Just like the Ford Fiesta, the bad boy Golf was actually replaced by a bad boy Peugeot 306 as well. So it seems as though Mike was able to use all those additional textures and everything else that he put into that car, but it just had to be changed to a Peugeot. Sad in a way, because it's just not as cool as the Golf.
The Jeep Grand Cherokee, we lost that, but I wasn't too worried. I think we had the Range Rover in. Was it the Range Rover or the Land Rover we got in? Whichever one I modelled for the game. I preferred the Land Rover or the Range Rover. I think it was a Range Rover. I preferred that car over the Cherokee anyway, and I think we used the Cherokee as a burnt out vehicle. In fact, we used some of the BMWs as burnt out vehicles as well in the game, and if you're savvy enough you'll be able to go around the game and spot those as well. The Vectra police car beta, again, I think this was just a case of us trying out some new techniques on it, and so we called it beta so that it wouldn't make it into the game. But I'm pretty sure the Vectra's in there. I think it's like the undercover police car, or the SO19, SO16, SO19 police car. We did lose Mercedes-Benz, and this was going to be disastrous for us because we would have lost all of the German manufacturers. But we actually found Brabus, and we found a Brabus dealer in London who was willing to license us the Brabus badge and the Brabus car. Now, of course, Brabus is essentially Mercedes-Benz that are souped up. But it was super awesome. We went down to the show house for a day, got to drive the cars, we got all our picture reference. So when we made the cars for the Getaway, we would go find a car and take maybe 100 pictures of every single angle of the car. This will help us when we were modeling, so we didn't have, like nowadays you just buy the CAD model off the manufacturer. In those days what we used to do is have all these pictures, and then we would model the car by looking at the angles of these pictures. And so it was really important that we essentially went around the whole car and got every single angle. I think later on we did manage to get a CAD model from someone. We couldn't use it for in-game, but we laid over the CAD model over the car we modeled, and it was almost precisely dead on. It was super awesome to see that. We also used these reference photographs to actually create the textures that went over the cars. But yeah, Brabus was the manufacturer that we used to replace Mercedes. Toyota MR2 beta version. Now the Toyota MR2 is in there, and again I think it was just a naming convention thing that we put in there. I think maybe we were doing some tests with it, trying out textures. I remember the MR2 when I modeled that, the texture was probably the hardest thing, just because there's a lot of line work that you have to do, especially on those back grills, and you would lose some of the crispness of that line because of the size of the textures we had to work with. And so I'm pretty sure that the beta version again was me just experimenting with techniques.
I actually got a bit more information from Mike about the Toyota MR2 after he filmed this video. I'm just going to read out what he said now. So, the MR2 is one of only a few cars that had a complete remodel. The original was done by Ben Brudenell, the other car artist, and was made early on in development. But as we learned how to get the most out of the PS2, we made significant improvements in the pipeline. I revisited the MR2 in alpha and completely rebuilt it. So, there you go.
Jaguar XJ6, this is the third Charlie car we had, and of course the final one there being the Rover 75. But again, we lost that through licensing. A real pity. We'd gone through a number of these prestige cars that an old gangster like Charlie would have, but didn't manage to get the licensing on any of them. We also created a gang version of the XJ6, and this again was what Charlie's higher up gang members would be driving around and taking you out with. I think in the end we used maybe a Lexus, or was that may have been Colin's gang. But we did have these high-res Jaguars racing around the Getaway at some point. Skoda Felicia, it was just a rubbish car. I don't even think we lost the licensing on that one. We built it, we put it in game, and it was so generic. I think we were just offended that we had it in the game that we decided to cut it ourselves. Subaru, now this was cut just because it looked odd in traffic. Very cool looking car, super powerful. I think it was really probably the fastest car we had in game, but it just looked strange, especially when, if you look at the Getaway, we have a number of these cars duplicated on screen. So I think we could load up maybe 5 in a zone. So we'd have, essentially we gridded up the map, and then each grid would have a list of cars that would appear in that grid. And then as you crossed over to a grid, we would filter out the cars that were in the old list and filter in the cars from the new list. And when you had 4 or 5 Subarus just driving past you, it looked super strange. And so we cut it from the game just because it looked odd in traffic. So Mitsubishi was cut from the game as well. We didn't get the licensing from this, and the GT was supposed to be our kind of poor man's Ferrari for London. And it was a little bit of a pity to lose that car. The profile was quite nice. It would have been quite a nice, desirable kind of mid-range performance car that you could have picked up in the Getaway. Again, a pity not to get that, but I think Mitsubishi was one of those manufacturers who didn't want us killing people with their vehicles. And the last vehicle we have on this list is the Motorbike. Now, the Motorbike is actually a piece that I created towards the end of the Getaway. It was an R&D piece for the Getaway Black Monday. It wasn't meant for the Getaway ever, but I did put the model into the Getaway to test it. And I think it was a Yamaha bike, if I'm not mistaken. And it was a Yamaha bike that had been parked up outside our studio in London for like 2 years. It never left the spot. And so I went down there one day, took a ton of photograph reference from it, and then proved out that we could have bikes in the next version of the Getaway. And I didn't want just motorbikes in there, I also wanted push bikes as well. So it was about proving the tech, the animation tech, so how the player gets on and off this vehicle, and then also what happens when you crashed into it, how the player reacted to it. And then just the fact that we could have motorbikes in with normal traffic and get the physics correct on those. So it was early R&D for the next game, but I did use the Getaway to test that R&D.